All right, let's get into politics now. We are getting new reaction one day after the Trump administration announced the end of the Obama-era immigration program known as Daca. President Trump met with congressional leaders from both parties at the White House earlier, where he said he's had no second thoughts on his decision. The move now puts the fate of the Dreamer program in the hands of Congress. Well, last night, President Trump tweeted Congress now has 6 months to legalize Daca, something the Obama administration was unable to do. If they can't, I will revisit this issue. Well, earlier on Capitol Hill, House Speaker Paul Ryan backed the president's decision and was hopeful that a legislative compromise could be reached.
President Obama was wrong to do it in the first place because he overstepped his constitutional bounds. We, the president and Congress, take an oath to support and defend the Constitution. So President Trump was right in his decision. He made the right call. I'm also encouraged by the fact that he gave us time to work out a consensus, to find a compromise, because these kids don't, for the most part, don't know any other home than the United States. So I think the president was right to give us the time we need to find that compromise. Where does that compromise exist? That's what we're going to spend the next months figuring out, where that compromise is. But I think it's totally reasonable and appropriate that when you take a look at the Daca Dilemma, this is a dilemma that in large part stems from the fact that it is a symptom of a larger problem. And the larger problem is that we do not have control of our borders. And so it's only reasonable and fitting that we also address the root cause of the problem, which is borders that are not sufficiently controlled, while we address this very real and very human problem that's right in front of us.
Well, congressional Democrats slammed the move. They're calling on the GOP leadership to bring the DREAM Act to the floor for a vote immediately.
The president's decision to end Daca was heartless and it was brainless. If this order stands, hundreds of thousands of families will be ripped apart. Tens of thousands of American businesses will lose hardworking employees. Congress has an ability and an obligation to act, which is why we today are calling on Speaker Ryan and Leader McConnell to immediately put the DREAM Act on the floor for a vote in the House and Senate. We're ready to pass it. I am confident that if put on the floor, it will garner overwhelming support from both sides of the aisle. But let us say this, and I think I speak for the leader as well. If a clean DREAM Act does not come to the floor in September, we're prepared to attach it to other items this fall until it passes.
Let's bring in our friend Bob Cusack. He is the editor-in-chief of The Hill, and he joins us from Washington. Good to see you.
Hey, Vlad.
So what do you make of the reaction from both sides of the aisle, and what are some of the options lawmakers are considering to address Daca?
Well, this is going to be very difficult for Congress to get some type of compromise, as Speaker Ryan was talking about. Remember, comprehensive immigration reform, or the DREAM Act, some version of that, and that goes back to the George W. Bush administration when he almost got it over the line and got to his desk. But this is going to be so difficult. So 6 months that's not a lot of time to come up with something that is going to be acceptable to both sides. So that what the Democrats do, they feel like public opinion is on their side, and that's why they're going on offense here. Now, remember, there are some Republicans, but not many, less than 10, who supported the DREAM Act in the Obama administration. However, it passed the House, but it didn't pass the Senate. So this is going to be very volatile, and it's very unlikely that the parties are going to be able to come to some type of an agreement.
Bob, a fascinating front-page article on thehill.com. I encourage our viewers to go check it out. The GOP fears damage from Trump's move on Daca, specifically with Latino voters. Explain.
Yeah, well, George W. Bush got more than 40% of Latino voters when he first ran, and the number has gone down steadily. Now, Trump did better than expected against Hillary Clinton, but this is something. If you look at the fastest growing demographic in the country is Latinos, and they're flocking to the Democratic Party, and that's why Democrats see that down the road that they feel like they're going to dominate elections because of that dynamic and this changing America way that we're becoming less white, and the Republican Party is very nervous that they need to branch out, or else the future of their party is going to be in doubt.
So what's really interesting is President Trump tweeted, Congress has now 6 months to legalize DACA. If they can't, I will revisit this issue. The conservative commentator, John Ziegler, wrote a really interesting piece about this. And he posits that there are just a couple of likely outcomes. And I'm just going to read this. This is on Mediaite. He says, Congress does nothing and Trump says, never mind. At best, an embarrassing draw. Congress does nothing and Trump, out of ego, ends DACA in an election year. Democrats win. Congress passes something very liberal, Trump vetoes, but keeps DACA. Democrats win. Congress passes something very liberal and Trump vetoes, but keeps DACA. Democrats win. Congress passes something very liberal and Trump signs DACA into law. Democrats win. I mean, it seems by the president saying we will revisit this, he's lost any kind of leverage he may have had.
Yeah, he put a deadline out and kind of pulled it back. But even with that deadline, I think the chances of Congress coming up with something are definitely less than 10%. So, and that's why President Trump is so conflicted. Because remember, he did run on this promise of ending DACA, and he went hard right on immigration. That's a big reason, not the only reason, but a big reason why he won the Republican primary wire to wire. So that's why I think you've seen this kind of compromise. It didn't get a lot of praise, and it got a lot of attention on cable news networks, and the reaction was not good. So maybe that's why Trump decided, well, I'll revisit this at a later date if Congress fails to do anything.
And so then what do you make, Bob, of reporters, Maggie Haberman specifically of the New York Times, saying actually Trump didn't really want to do this?
Yeah, I mean, Trump himself has said that he's conflicted on this, that he loves kids, and just this news stories that you could see if there are mass deportations of these dreamers, that's going to be very bad for the president, and that's going to be bad for the Republican Party. However, it is part of Trump's base certainly doesn't want a 6-month delay of anything. They want to end DACA now. They contend it's illegal, that President Obama tried to, at one point did say he didn't have the power to do it. So they're saying end it now. So this is where Trump is conflicted. He's done a lot of things that actually shore up his base and keep his base with him. This one, he actually, if he caves and goes against what he promised on getting rid of DACA, that actually could be the first thing that erodes his base.
Very interesting. We also heard Speaker Paul Ryan sounding sort of appreciative for being given some time to find a compromise. But Congress already has a packed agenda. They got to raise the debt ceiling. They got the Harvey relief and the budget bill. If you're a member of Congress, are you sort of, for the camera saying this is great, we've got a little time to figure this out, but are you really going back to your office and to your staff and going, oh, man, this is something, we wanted to talk about tax reform. We don't want to do this.
That's right. That's right. They do want to talk about tax reform, and immigration is so hard to do, and that's why both parties have failed to do it. Remember, when Democrats controlled both the White House and Congress in 2009, 2010, they didn't even put it on the House or Senate floor. So, but now the politics have changed since then, and Democrats are more embracing immigration reform than they were back then. So this is another thing for Congress to do. They've had a very rough year legislatively. Speaker Ryan voted against the DREAM Act when it was on the House floor. So that's why I don't see a lot of compromise in this area, because both bases, the Republican base and the Democratic base, will criticize any compromise, and both bases right now are very strong.
Will the president get out there? It's interesting also, Bob, you've got lawmakers, Lindsey Graham, Marco Rubio, saying, please, Mr. President, tell us what you'd like to see. Will he get out there and sort of do some campaigning, and in other words, to members of Congress, not to the American people, but to try and help them? There's a question that was for Sarah Huckabee Sanders yesterday from the White House correspondents there saying, look, we know the president doesn't write laws, but you can somehow craft legislation and send that to the Congress. Do you think that he'll be doing that?
I don't think he's going to get involved in too many specifics. On some of his positions, he's shifted, especially since the campaign. Every president does that. I think one thing that obviously Trump wants is the border wall, and that's his #1 campaign promise. However, Democrats are not willing to deal with a codifying of DACA, putting that into law of what President Obama did administratively for the wall. They're saying they're not going for that big trade. So I don't know where they can compromise on this, and I think that Congress is probably better off trying to strike some type of deal on this, but that is almost mission impossible, I think.
All right, let's talk about the trip the president is taking right at this moment. He's headed to North Dakota to continue his push on tax reform. We were just talking about how packed the legislative agenda is. What do we expect to hear from the president, and how much is riding on tax reform in addition to all the other things that they have to do after the failure to repeal the Affordable Care Act?
Vlad, is very important. They have to pass something on taxes. Now, reforming the entire tax code is very difficult. When you get rid of loopholes, you trigger lobbying battles, and it's very difficult to do. It hasn't been done since 1986, and that was done in a bipartisan way. This is likely going to be a very partisan battle, kind of like health care, where Republicans, if they're able to pass a budget, then they can just ram through a tax package just on Republican votes. So now he's also bringing Heidi Heitkamp on Air Force One today, which is very interesting. She's a Democrat, conservative Democrat, who's up for re-election next year in a state that Trump easily won. So this is really one of the first few times we've seen bipartisanship on Trump's behalf to advance his agenda. But again, they need to get something done. I think it's more likely they're going to get tax cuts done, not a huge tax cut, but lower the corporate tax a bit and also give an individual tax rate break. That unites Republicans, but they are so fractured right now, it would be embarrassing if they can't pass something on what is their bread and butter, and that's reducing taxes.
To be continued. Bob Cusack, as always, my friend, thank you very much.
Thanks, Vlad.